my CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Happy Monday, one and all. It's 9 o'clock. I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News Tonight. After 30,000 pro-Palestine supporters took over the streets of London on Saturday during protests marred by anti-Semitic chanting, I'll explain why the woke left should hang their heads in shame for cheering this on. Israel's fight is ours too. That is my big opinion next. Then I'll get reaction from my top pundits, Carol Malone, Benjamin Butterworth, and Belinda DeLucy. Plus, I'll speak to Iranian dissident Vahid Beheshti. Why? Well, because he was chased by a mob of pro-Palestinian protesters who allegedly threatened to behead him in London in 2023 because he was carrying an Israeli flag. Vahid recounts his terrifying ordeal live in the studio shortly. And with fears of an all-out war in the Middle East growing by the day, I'll get the blistering take of one of America's biggest conservative commentators, the world-renowned Ben Shapiro. Also coming up, as prisons in Britain struggle with an overcrowding crisis, should foreign criminals face immediate deportation and a ban from returning to the UK? Is it good riddance? I'll be asking Reform UK leader and GB News star Richard Tice. Plus, should it be against the law to misgender someone? According to Labour plans for justice, calling someone by the wrong pronoun could land you in jail. Ernest Jones and Rebecca Jane debate that one in The Clash. Also, I've done a few in my time. Are fat jokes offensive? The brains behind Notting Hill and Love Actually, Richard Curtis, has said, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and promised he'll never use them in his films again. But is that political correctness gone mad, or is it progress? What's wrong with jokes about the Chubsters? That's our big debate later. As always, you'll get a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages, hot off the press. And Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie is uncancelled later in the show with some very harsh words for the BBC. So, a blockbuster 2 hours coming up. My big opinion is on its way. You won't want to miss it. First, the news and Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, we start this bulletin with some breaking news that's reaching us from Brussels tonight, Belgium's capital city. We can tell you there appears to have been a terrorist attack in Brussels tonight, and we can tell you a suspect is on the run after 2 people were shot dead. This happened just over an hour ago in the Belgian capital, Brussels. Local media reporting that as a terrorist attack. The Belgian Prime Minister, we can also tell you, Alexander De Croo, has confirmed both victims were Swedish nationals. He's convened an emergency session of his government. Those live pictures coming to you from Brussels as we speak, as forensic teams descend on the scene, desperate to preserve evidence of the last hour or so and exactly what has happened. The victims thought to have been football supporters visiting the Belgian capital for their country's Euro 2024 qualifier against Belgium. At least some eyewitness reports saying they were wearing Swedish football tops. Well, we're monitoring local media in Belgium for you. We can also tell you that they're saying that the gunman has posted a video on social media claiming to be part of ISIS. And also, in that video that he's posted online, he is speaking Arabic and he's carried out the attack in the name of God. So, as you can see, a serious event in Brussels in Belgium tonight. Forensic teams on the scene, a police presence on the streets, 2 people dead, a gunman on the run, and an emergency session for the Belgian government tonight as they try to work out what happened and indeed their response going forward. We'll bring you more on that as we get it. Now, here in the UK, the Prime Minister has confirmed at least 6 British citizens were killed in the Hamas attack on Israel last weekend, and a further 10 people, he said, are still missing. This morning, Rishi Sunak visited a Jewish secondary school in North London, reassuring students his government will always support them. And then later, he told the Commons the government would be providing an extra £10 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza, saying the Palestinian people were victims of Hamas too. Well, the shuttle diplomacy continues as well. The US Secretary of State is in Israel again, holding talks with senior leaders on how to get that aid into Gaza. Antony Blinken's visit comes as doctors in Gaza say they're struggling to treat the huge numbers of patients injured in airstrikes. Aid agencies saying hospitals are running out of medicines and fuel for generators, with only the most serious cases given access to vital treatment. And the United Nations has warned the humanitarian situation on the Gaza Strip is deteriorating quickly. Well, there was hope twice earlier on today that aid could come through to Gaza through Egypt's Rafah crossing. That's in the south on its border with Gaza. There was an expectation the crossing would open first thing this morning and then again this afternoon, but it still hasn't opened up, despite thousands massing at the border, desperate to get out of the Gaza Strip. In the meantime, in the north of Israel, Hezbollah, we understand from our correspondent Charlie Peters on the ground in Tel Aviv, has been firing rockets at Israel in the northern territories, and the Israeli Defence Forces returned fire with shelling, helicopter gunships, as they also, as you can see from the pictures here near Ashkelon, gather in the south to prepare for their ground offensive. The US President Joe Biden telling Iran not to get involved today, and also saying he was confident Israel would act under the rules of war, adding there must be a path to a Palestinian state. Well, here at home, hundreds of people gathered outside the BBC's headquarters tonight in London to protest against the corporation's editorial stance on Hamas. The corporation is facing a backlash from Jewish groups for calling Hamas militants instead of terrorists. The crowd, supported by the National Jewish Assembly outside Broadcasting House, chanted, "BBC, shame on you," with one placard reading, "If the King calls Hamas terrorists, so can you." The BBC has issued a statement saying it takes the use of language very seriously. Pro-Palestinian activists have also criticised the BBC, covering its headquarters in red paint at the weekend. That's the news on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News.
Welcome to GB News, where we're not afraid of the word terrorist. Now, you don't have to be Jewish to be terrified by the reaction in this country to an evil terror attack on Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. Hamas's goal is genocide, to wipe out one specific group of people because of their race. Precisely the goal of Hitler under the Nazis. You'd think that what is effectively a second Holocaust on the Jewish people that we're now witnessing would trigger howls of fury. You'd think that thousands of freedom-loving Brits would be on the streets waving the Israeli flag and condemning these atrocities. Because that's what you would do if Hitler came back, wouldn't you? Well, now I'm not so sure. How else can you explain thousands of people this week in Sydney, Australia, supposedly a civilised country, chanting "Gas the Jews"? How about this charming lady in Glasgow taunting Jewish people this week about the Second World War? Horrific stuff. How else can you explain the anti-Semitic chants in the capital and the authorities permitting the construction of a Free Palestine protest stage in front of the cenotaph, a sacred memorial to remember those that we lost in the First and Second World Wars? That monument this weekend has been a backdrop for the effective cheering on of a murderous medieval terror squad. I'm sorry, but if you were one of those people waving a Palestinian flag hours after the murder of 260 revellers at a music festival, and hours after the rape, torture and murder of innocent civilians and the mutilation of children, then you are allying yourself to this evil when you should be standing up to it. Here we go again. Jewish people targeted and killed. In Berlin, these lovely pro-Palestinian protesters are marking houses with a Star of David to highlight where the Jews are living. The same is happening to Jewish businesses. In Germany, folks, in 2023. Where is the anger? Where is the revulsion? Where are the marches on the streets for this hellish repetition of history? And where is Gary Lineker, who's obsessed with linking everything to 1930s Germany, except actual identical actions that are the same as what happened in 1930s Germany? Perhaps Gary's been busy washing another bottle of Just for Men charcoal edition into his hair. Meanwhile, those fools at the Met Police proudly announced on Twitter that the weekend's protests in the capital largely went without incident. Tell that to the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, who observed that, and I quote, "there is a carnival of Jew hate in London this weekend." Now, I want peace and safety for the people of Palestine and the people of Israel. Israel may well have a case to answer for its treatment of Palestinians, and a two-state solution must surely be the holy grail and the aim. But right now, Israel faces an existential threat. What we saw last Saturday was a shot across the bows. Israel are right that Hamas must be eliminated in the way that ISIS and Al-Qaeda had to be in the past. Israel's fight is our fight. It's a fight for anyone in the Western world, a fight against fascism, a fight against evil ideology, and a fight for freedom. What an insult to our fallen heroes of both world wars that this weekend Whitehall was flooded with people trashing the values for which they gave their lives. Keir Starmer has been brilliant on this, well done to him. But the woke left should hang their heads in shame. What we're witnessing at the moment as Jewish children, the elderly and a Holocaust survivor are held hostage is the selective morality of the Be Kind crowd. The self-styled nice people, ripped to the tits on anti-Semitic hatred, are cheering on murder, mutilation, rape and a litany of war crimes. Don't forget this. I know the BBC struggle to tell you this, but Hamas is an evil terror outfit, dripping in wicked, wretched and faintly satanic ideology. If Israel falls, we all fall. Just as in 1938, once again, we must stand up to evil, not celebrate it, in London, Manchester, Glasgow and beyond. If Jewish people can't be safe in Britain, we're not a proper country anymore. Now, what's your reaction? Mark at gbnews.com. Let's get reaction from the Daily Express columnist, Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda DeLucy. Carol, if Israel falls, we all do.
No, I totally agree. You know, I've been ashamed of my country over the past 10 days. I've been ashamed at you know, the phrase kept on going round, ricocheting in my head, man's inhumanity to man. Because not just for what actually happened in Israel, I mean, put that to one side for a moment, if you can, and you've got to look at people's reaction here to it. And the consensus among a lot of people is they were asking for it. Not a single baby who died was asking for it. Not a single woman who was raped and then killed was asking for it. Not a single family that was slaughtered was asking for it. This was a terrorist group that did this. And I am shocked and ashamed that people took to the streets on Saturday and were chanting this stuff. And I'm even more ashamed of our cops. Seriously, what are the police in this country for? I think there was something like 3 charges put forward the other day, 15 arrests. And I saw people attacking cops. I saw protesters attacking cops. Why aren't they in jail now? And what about all the people, all the university lecturers this week who have called the murder of children and people in Israel beautiful? What about the woman who's standing in a South Kensington restaurant looking at the video of a family being slaughtered and saying, oh, are your people dying? Why hasn't she been arrested? All of these people should be arrested for hate crime. You know, the cops in this country, they're too busy faffing around looking for anti-trans nonsense rather than going for the Islamists who are on our streets. And we know that tonight 2 more people have been killed in Brussels. I'm ashamed that, you know, and on that protest on Saturday should never have gone ahead. France have banned the protest because that couldn't have entertained a dissenting voice on Saturday. You couldn't have had Jews out there. There was one guy waving a Jewish flag who we're going to talk to, and look what happened to him. The mob set upon him. So, I mean, I just think the people who are shouting all this nonsense, it's terrifying. You don't have to be Jewish to be afraid of what's happening now, because what's happening to them is going to be happening to all of us, because all of us, you said this before, and it's really important to say this, you know, I mourn the deaths of the children and the people in Palestine, the people that have been killed since Saturday, and I mourn the people in Israel. You know, none of them were to blame for what happened. One group was to blame, and it was a group of butchers called Hamas who don't give a stuff about the people in Israel. They don't care. They don't care about the casualties.
Indeed. Now, Benjamin, I've applauded Keir Starmer for unambiguous support for Israel after a terror attack, but many on the woke left should hang their heads in shame.
I mean, first of all, you'd expect that from Keir Starmer, because people often forget his wife and children are practising Jews, so this will be very close to home for his family.
And his father's a toolmaker.
Indeed, as they often say. Look, I think the idea that the woke left are the people celebrating this is nonsense, because, of course, those people on the streets despise gay people or women's rights. They couldn't be further from woke if they tried.
Correct.
But what frustrates me is that I think the police are incredibly naive in the last week.
Completely.
Many of these people, I suspect most that have chosen to go out and march, are not pro-Palestine, they are anti-Semite.
Yes.
If they really cared about the Muslim people in that part of the world and about the Palestinians, they would be with the Jews and the Israelis asking why Gaza is run by an organisation, a terrorist organisation, that takes away the most basic human rights at all times from people living in Gaza. You know, they stand with these signs that say Free Palestine. Well, I think freedom would be in very short supply if Palestine really were an independent state under Hamas.
Yeah.
And the truth is that when they use the language of peace and justice, they are trying to give an alibi to evil, and none of us should let that happen.
However, Belinda, the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, were explicit to say that the Palestinian people are not reflective of Hamas or vice versa, that the majority of people in Palestine just want to live their lives in safety. There have got to have been thousands of people that have been on these pro-Palestine marches this weekend and the last few days who want peace and are simply speaking up for their people who, let's be honest, have seen decades of privation and death.
Oh, yeah, I mean, Hamas uses Palestinians as human shields. I mean, they're no friend to the Palestinians. All this slaughter and rape and beheading has done nothing to further the Palestinian cause. The march on Saturday should be everyone united, Muslims, Christians, Jews, non-religious, coming together against Islamist terror attacks, which cause unimaginable suffering around the world. But unfortunately, it's been years and years and years of complacency from Western leaders that has revived Nazism under this different cloak. You know, we saw in 2019 Asia Bibi, the Pakistani Christian who wants refuge in this country, but our government said no because it didn't want to upset the Islamist extremists in this country. I knew then that we had kind of fallen and lost our priorities and lost our moral compass. In 2021, there were convoys of cars with Palestinian flags going up and down Jewish streets, threatening to sexually assault Jewish mothers, Jewish women's. No one was prosecuted. And what is arresting going to do anyway? It's not going to stop the hate, Mark. Yeah. That hate is already there. The government needs to go much further and root out the hate that's in this country for our Jewish people.
But when you have policemen, you know, the cops today were issuing, they were saying to people, if you knew who those two women were who had those paragliders on their backs the other day, do you know what? I could find those two women. You know, they're so easy. There was a dozen photographers. They want to be seen. Well, no, there's a dozen photographers around from national newspapers taking photographs. Ring them up and say, hey, have you got a picture? Because some of them will have got a front face shot of them. There are cameras all over the streets of London. Why don't they have all the agitators now in custody?
But it's in our schools, it's in our universities, so they're being taught.
They're being taught that, but what I'm saying is that thing on Saturday where you have people blatantly inciting, that wasn't pro-Palestine, that was anti-Jewish protest on Saturday.
And they knew it. The people who attended the protest knew that it would cause harm and stress and fear in the British Jewish community, and they knew it'd be infiltrated by Hamas supporters, and they went ahead and marched anyway.
Well, where are the cops? Where is the fear now that those people can't do that again? There's no fear.
Correct.
No fear. Because the cops aren't going to do anything.
And I would just say one other thing, which is, you know, I struggle to get to this studio on Saturday night for the programme I do because of the scale of riot police around Kensington where the Israeli embassy is. You find me one country's embassy allied to Palestine that has been subjected to that from Jewish people or supporters of Israel. It's not happening, and I think we know why.
I completely agree. That's my strong view. If Jewish people are not safe in Britain, we're not a proper country anymore. There you go. Well, look, lots more to come after violence flared on the streets of Britain over the weekend. We'll be joined by the man threatened with beheading simply for carrying an Israeli flag. Without police intervention, he could have lost his life. He is next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GBNews.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GBNews.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Should you be sent to jail for misgendering someone? Imagine a biological bloke that identifies as a woman. You say he rather than she, and you're banged up. Well, that could happen under a Labour government. We'll debate that in The Clash. But the Israeli-Hamas conflict has sparked political tensions across the United Kingdom, and one shocking example was caught on video this weekend as an Iranian dissident waving an Israeli flag was attacked by a baying mob of pro-Palestine protesters outside the Foreign Office in London. Horrific scenes. Take a look. Welcome to the United Kingdom in 2023, folks. The victim, Vahid Beheshti, had to be protected by around 50 police officers and claims that one of the attackers threatened to behead him. He was later found in possession of a large knife in a sinister snapshot of how quickly things abroad can trigger closer to home. Well, I'm delighted to say that Vahid joins me now in the studio. Vahid, first of all, are you OK physically?
Now, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What were your emotions as this mob ran after you?
So I thought it's going to be finished because I saw them.
When you say finished, what do you mean?
I mean, I thought they are going to kill me because I saw what they done 10 days ago in Israel. I know their natures. 236 days I have been camping outside of the Foreign Office. The first 72 days I was on hunger strike, 2 weeks in hospital. Then I came back in order to ask our government to place IRGC, the godfather of Hamas, Hezbollah, Jihad Islami and other terrorist groups, on the list of terrorist organizations. And we have to do this because Hamas and Hezbollah are proscribed in this country. Legally, we have to proscribe the founder of them and the main supporter of them, which is IRGC, Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Yeah.
But the government is not doing that.
What is their ideology?
Their ideology, they want to turn the whole world to the Islamic State. That's what their ideology. And they do everything in order to reach to that ideology.
What happens if you're a Christian or a Jew or just an atheist?
I'm just going to give you the example. This Saturday, the guy was walking in front of my tent, and for half an hour, he was shouting, Jews are not allowed to live on our planet. On 21st century, in middle of London, they were chanting this. These weren't Palestinian protesters. These people, they were terrorists who they gather in front of our tents, about 100 of them, and they're trying to kill me, as you explained. You know, one of the guys who said to me, I'm going to cut your neck. Later on, when they arrested him, he was waiting in front of my tent when it was dark. Police arrested him. He was carrying a knife with him. So he was going to do that. What they done in Israel, let me put it in this way. We are in this war. Maybe some people, they don't like it. We are in war with terrorists. There is no way. We have to get rid of this. Of course, it's going to be painful. It's like a cancer. You're going through the surgery. It's going to be painful. In the region, in order to clean the region, we have to get rid of Hezbollah, Hamas, Jihad Islami, other terrorist group, and then the head of octopus. These are the legs and the hands of octopus. The head of octopus is IRGC, Iranian regime, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Iran is a nuclear power. They have nuclear weapons.
Not yet.
What happens if Iran enters this war?
I think this is going to happen sooner or later, because Iran has no choice, Iranian regime. Hamas is Iranian regime. Hamas, it cannot last even few weeks if Iranian regime won't support them. So if the other terrorist groups see Iranian regime is not going to support Hamas, then they're going to lose the trust to Iranian regime. So Iranian regime, as soon as Israel entered to the Gaza, Iranian regime somehow is going to get involved, because it's not going to lose the other terrorist groups' trust. So we are going to witness this. But let me put it this way. There is a shortcut where the world leaders stand on the side of the Iranian people. More than 80 million of Iranian people are trying really hard to bring this regime down. As soon as something happens, I promise, the Iranian regime are the ones who are going to finish the Iranian people are the ones who are going to finish the Iranian regime. But Iranian regime used these proxies in past years to put fear inside the neighbor countries and the West. And appeasement policy. Unfortunately, we are carrying with our appeasement policy.
Stand up to Iran, stand up to Hamas. Israel must eliminate the threat of Hamas at all costs.
Exactly.
And what about you? You almost died this week. What do your family think of the situation, your loved ones? Do they want you to stop?
They all want me to stop, but I'm not going to do that.
Will you go out again with an Israeli flag?
Let me explain what happened, actually. I wasn't waving this Israeli flag. So on the third attack, we got attacked 3 times. On the third attack, they got the Israeli flag from top of my camp, broke it, and took it. I went after them, and I got the Israeli flag back. The scene you see, we all watch, I've got the Israeli flag back from them, and I went there because I knew what they were going to do. They were going to burn the Israeli flag in front of my camp, and I wouldn't let that happen. I'm going to stay in front of Foreign Office. Doesn't matter how long it takes, and doesn't matter what price I paid, until we proscribe IRGC, put them where they belong on the list of terrorist organizations.
Vahid, thank you so much for joining us. A compelling and quite devastating story to hear firsthand. Vahid Beheshti there. Your reaction, mark at GBNews.com. Closer to home, as Britain's prisons reach full capacity, should foreign criminals face immediate deportation and bans from returning to the UK? I'll be asking Richard Tice. He's live in the studio next. But next up in the clash, stateside journalist and author Ernest Jones goes head-to-head with Deputy UKIP leader Rebecca Jane, asking whether it should be illegal to misgender someone. So basically, you could go to jail for saying that a biological man is a woman, or vice versa. The world's gone mad. We'll debate that next.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
How would Richard Tice make Britain safer? How would he tackle overcrowding prisons? The leader of Reform UK, GB News star Richard Tice, is coming up shortly, but it's time now for this. Yes, it's time for the clash. Now, deliberately calling someone by the wrong gender pronouns may land you in jail for 2 years under Labour. According to the Mail on Sunday, Keir Starmer is determined to toughen up the sentencing guidelines for abuse and violence against trans people and would make attacks motivated by hatred of the victim's gender identity an aggravated offence. However, critics are warning the policy could mean jail sentences for someone refusing to use a transgender person's preferred pronouns or referring to them by their former name or their birth sex rather than their chosen gender. What do you think? Should it be against the law to misgender someone? By the way, what this means is that you could have a biological male, fully intact, full meat and 2 veg, and you say he rather than she, and you've got 2 years in clink. Is that acceptable? Let me know your thoughts at GB News on Twitter. Or you can go to email mark@gbnews.com and do vote in our online poll at Twitter as well. To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome the journalist and author of The Case for Cancel Culture, Ernest Owens, and UKIP Deputy Leader, Rebecca Jane. Ernest, should it be against the law to misgender someone?
I believe if the person is showing malicious intent, if they're going out of their way to really create an unsafe environment for a person, I definitely think that is a form of harassment and with the intention to draw a level of harm to that person. We know that when people are being publicly misgendered in direct ways that may not be of any type of real innocence, that the intent is to humiliate, to bully, to cause harm to that person. And if you're going to weaponize their sexuality or their gender identity or expression as a way to create that kind of harm, I definitely think there should be some level of consequence, because the reality is that when people are misgendered in their workplace, in public spaces, it can lead to physical harm. It can lead to discrimination and other issues. And I think that it's not as simple as some people may try to mischaracterize it, but it actually is a real issue.
Ernest, this is a legal minefield, though, isn't it? How could you prove malicious intent? If somebody says he rather than she, perhaps they're just stating the facts.
But I think to trivialize it, right? I think in many cases, misgendering takes place more aggressively when a person corrects an individual and they still choose to do so and make it a point to continue to do so.
And why can't they do that?
Environment, because at the end of the day, would you want someone to disrespect you? If someone saw you and you said your name is Dr. So-and-so, and they chose, or let's say the royal queen, right? Queen Elizabeth, and you say your majesty because she's royalty, and you said, I'm not saying that, I'm going to keep saying Elizabeth. That's a form of disrespect. And so we have titles and positions in this world where we're supposed to properly identify people respectfully. If you see, a woman and you consistently called her, him, you keep on doing that to someone, you're literally trying to draw attention in a way that's disrespectful. And we know what harm that is. I mean, think, for example, the N-word, right? Someone says to me, I'm not going to refer to you as an African-American or a Black person. I'm going to call you the N-word because that's how I feel. That's hate speech. That's violent. That's rude. And there should be a consequence for that.
OK, well, listen, I think when it comes to the late Queen, it's a statement of fact that she was Her Majesty. It's a statement of fact that she was called Elizabeth. And by the way, you're welcome to call me Doctor. It's a vocation my mother always wanted me to pursue. But listen, what do you think, Rebecca Jane? Banged up for misgendering someone. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I mean, last week we're getting told that our prisons are full and we should stop jailing rapists. And then this week, loony Labour are trying to put people in prison for up to 2 years for misgendering somebody. So I firmly support anybody that wants to change their gender, that, live your best life. But this is setting a very dangerous hierarchy of gender and a precedent. Freedom of speech is absolutely a basic right. And this new law would trump that. We would see women put in jail for up to 2 years if she refers to a biological male as being female. Now, if that woman does call that biological male a biological male, anything else, well, it's just not true. It would be complete and utter gaslighting. And my question is, where do we go with this? Do we start allowing people to identify themselves as fish? And if we say, no, you're human, we get locked up for 2 years. Where does this end? The world is so divided today. We've just sat and seen that, and it's absolutely traumatic. And in a time where we should be trying to bring people together, this potential new law would do only other than create complete division.
OK, Rebecca Jane, but if you have a biological male intact that identifies as female, if you call her a him, you're a filthy bigot.
Yeah, and it's absolutely ridiculous because at the end of the day, that person is a biological male. We can't pretend otherwise. It's gaslighting to say that. We can say to them, you are male or whatever and all the rest of it, but to actually then make us believe that that's what they were at birth, that's not true. We've got to talk about science and about biology, and biology is not changing gender.
Rebecca Jane, this is bigoted language. You are a bigot. Bigot.
Oh dear, put me in prison, Mark.
I just don't.
Well, we don't want you to do that. Ernest, do you want to come back to what RJ had to say?
Yes, I just don't understand why it's so hard to just respect people for how they identify. And I don't think that it's fair to make the generalization between species. We're talking about humans identifying themselves as humans. And why is it that when someone decides to identify as a gender to which they see fit, that we're confusing that with another species of mammals?
Rebecca,
so
RJ, Ernest, I'll come back to you. Ernest, let Rebecca Jane respond to that.
Yeah.
Back to the bigot. Your turn.
You can identify as whatever you want to identify as, but we shouldn't be criminalizing people for having their belief that that's not what that person was born as. Why are you denying biology?
Ernest?
I mean, I don't think no one's denying biology, but who makes you the scientists to describe the evolution of a person? We know about gender dysphoria. That's a scientific term. If you understand biology and science, you understand that people who are transgender oftentimes experience gender dysphoria that leads to these issues, that also leads them to being transgender. And so it's funny how people make the biology and the science reference, but don't actually acknowledge the research behind what leads a person to transition. And so if we know that to be true, then we should respect who they identify as.
Ernest, I'm a big fan of your writing. I love it when you come on the show, and thank you for joining us tonight. I think you've spoken very eloquently, actually, and convincingly. But here's the issue. I think Rebecca and I both agree that if someone identifies by a different gender, good luck to them. It's a free world, no problem. I have trans friends myself. But if you force people to acknowledge their gender, that's compelled speech, and that's not compatible with a free society.
I disagree with that, because I think that, once again, the reality is, how often do we allow other people to have possession of our identities? It leads to discrimination in many ways, because then you open the floodgates of how people decide to address you. As a Black queer person, there are people who don't believe in quote-unquote homosexuality, and therefore they will not properly identify myself and my husband. They'll say, oh, your friend. I'm like, that's not my friend, that's my husband. I don't believe in a world that two men can biologically be in love, so I won't refer to you as a husband. You have to respect how people self-identify their unions and not allow them to make these arbitrary, poppycockish, definitions around identity for others. That's just not fair.
Listen, Ernest, Rebecca, what a brilliant debate. Thank you both for your time. The author of The Case for Cancel Culture, Ernest Owens, and UKIP Deputy Leader, Rebecca Jane. What do you think? Mark at gbnews.com. Bob on Twitter says, what an utterly ridiculous proposal. Labour would never get this law passed anyway. Paul says it should only be illegal if it's deliberately to cause harassment or likely to create or incite a public order offence. Jane says, since when did offending someone become illegal? The world and Labour have gone mad. Well, your verdict is in. 7% agree that it should be against the law to misgender someone. 93% say it should not. Coming up, as fears of all-out war grow, and the Egyptian president says Israel has gone beyond the right to self-defence. Has their retaliation against Hamas gone too far? My panel debate that shortly. But next, as prisons in Britain struggle with an overcrowding crisis, should foreign criminals face immediate deportation and a ban from returning to the UK? Who are you going to ask? Richard Tice, live in the studio, the leader of Reform UK. He's next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too. Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. We'll get to your emails shortly. US media megastar Ben Shapiro coming up in a minute. But first, it's time for GB News presenter and the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Now, after the alarming news last week that some criminals could walk free as Britain's prisons grapple with a record number of inmates, Justice Secretary Alex Chalk has today announced a flurry of policies to address the overcrowding crisis.
We will legislate for a presumption that custodial sentences of less than 12 months in prison will be suspended and offenders will be punished in the community instead, repaying their debt within communities, cleaning up our neighbourhoods and scrubbing graffiti off walls. We will also remove foreign offenders who should not be in the United Kingdom, taking up space in our prisons at vast expense to the taxpayer.
OK, interesting stuff. That was Alex Chalk. Now, let me say Richard Tice joins me in the studio with his manifesto ideas to make Britain safer. Richard, first of all, the overcrowding, it's a huge problem for our viewers and listeners.
Well, it is a huge problem, but it's not surprising because our population has grown by about 10 million in the last 15 years, and we haven't increased the number of prison places accordingly. So back in about 20 years ago, we had about 250 prisoners per 100,000 of population in England and Wales. That number has dropped by about 25 to 30%. To about 160 per 100,000 of population. That shows that basically, under the last 2 mainstream parties, under Labour and under the Tories, they've gone soft on crime, they've gone soft on prison, and guess what? We're now feeling the pain and the suffering of it. We've got feral gangs marauding our streets, no consequences, no fear of any form of deterrent. We've got knife crime through the roof, exactly the same reason. You have to basically say, we're going to have zero tolerance, broken windows policy. We know it works because it worked in New York. And you say, if you're shoplifting, if you're carrying a knife, you're gone. You're off the streets, somewhere into a detention camp, somewhere cold, damp, inhospitable, in a far-flung part of the UK, and you're there for some time. And then guess what? It's a deterrent. And we, decent, law-abiding, tax-paying folk, will feel a lot safer on our streets. You hear all this stuff from the Justice Secretary. We're sick of words. We want action. That's what we want.
Well, indeed, and actually, he's going the other way. He wants to allow low-level criminals to avoid jail and therefore surely no disincentive to crime. He's talking about rehabilitating these prisoners, but I think my viewers and listeners want punishment. You should be afraid that you're going to get caught. There's only one problem, though, Richard. Your plans are going to cost money. You're going to need to build more prisons.
Yes, correct.
The cost of accommodating an adult prisoner in this country is approximately £40,000 a year, right? Eton is cheaper, so how are you going to pay for it?
Look, it's actually very simple. The cost of building a prison place that they're currently doing is about $500,000 a place. I mean, that's a palace in most people's eyes. It's completely absurd. I've worked with people who can put up very cheap, cost-effective detention centres.
Prefab places.
Prefab-type places, sort of, you know... I use the wrong word, but sort of prefab, porta-cabin type places, but secure. You can do that for a fraction of the price. And yes, you can get people doing sensible things. You could be at a detention centre, but actually go and plant trees or do something useful in the community as long as you go back to the detention centre. The point is, you're off the streets, you're out the way. Maybe we should be trying stocks. Maybe we should do a poll on whether we should bring back the stocks in high streets. Humiliate these tow rags. We've got to be prepared to do something different. Otherwise, if you don't do something different, nothing will ever change. And the people are sick and tired of it, Mark.
And how do you tackle the woke culture within policing? I mean, even actually in relation to these pro-Palestinian demonstrations, the Met Police said that they were largely peaceful and there wasn't much trouble.
I think it's very simple.
7 arrests.
All of these things comes down to leadership and courage. So we at Reform UK are with our mayoral candidate, Howard Cox. On Friday lunchtime, we said the demonstration on Saturday should not go ahead because it would clearly incite hatred, the risk of violence, and that's exactly what happened. That's the sort of leadership that Sadiq Khan and the Home Secretary should have thought about and showed the courage to do on Friday. Then all of these events would not have occurred. And I think that's what we expect from our authorities, from our leaders in society, that we elect into positions. And it's all very well the strong words. You've got to follow that up with action, and people have got to respect the consequences.
What about these low-level criminals, though? If you're going to bang everyone up, in a manner of speaking, Richard...
There's no such thing as a low-level criminal. You're either a criminal or you're not. And if you're a criminal, off you go.
However, if you've perhaps, let's say, had a bit of a history of shoplifting, is 3 months in clink only going to teach you the tricks of the trade? That's Alex Chalk's argument, that actually those minor offences rehabilitate so that they don't enter a life of crime.
Let's just look at the proof, shall we? Let's look at the history, the evidence. I've just given you the data about how actually, per 100,000 of population, our prison places, people in prisons has gone down, and guess what? We've got chaos on the streets, we've got less respect and deterrent effect and fear of the consequences than ever. So we know that that softly approach doesn't work, so let's try something different. Because, as I say, law-abiding people feel less safe on the streets in all communities, in particular, for example, amongst the Jewish community.
Yeah. What about deporting foreign criminals ahead of schedule? That's the
sooner the better, frankly. Why should we pay? I mean, you might say, well, if someone's given a 10-year sentence, you might say that a year here and then off you go. But why should we pay for them? Frankly, just get them gone. We don't want these people here.
Indeed. I mean, would you do it instantly?
I think there probably is a case to say we want some justice served here. Otherwise, the fear would be they're deported immediately and they serve no justice whatsoever. So there's a bit of a balance there. Happy to have a debate about it. But what we shouldn't be doing is what we've been doing, which is let them serve sort of 2/3 of the sentence, let them out on some form of auto-release, and then let them stay in the country because they have some human rights appeal, because they might, something might go wrong in their home country if they go back there. Well, I'm sorry, you should have thought about that before you committed a crime here.
Briefly, Richard, how significant will law and order be at the next election as an issue?
I think it'll be very, very significant. And we're standing on a clear policy, zero tolerance, because the people have had absolutely sick to the back teeth of it. We don't feel as safe on the streets as we used to. And that's because of a failure of this government and a failure of leadership.
Fascinating stuff. Richard, thank you very much for joining us. Richard Tice, GB News star, and of course the leader of Reform UK. Fascinating stuff. Now listen, those emails are coming in thick and fast. I'll get to them very shortly. mark@gbnews.com. Fascinating stuff. Lots more to come in the show. Very excited about a pre-recorded interview with one of the most outspoken commentators on US politics, the famous conservative broadcaster Ben Shapiro. I'll be asking him about wobbly Joe Biden. Is he the man to tackle this growing international crisis? He's been dropping some remarkable truth bombs. You won't want to miss what he's got to say. So, coming up in my big interview, as I mentioned, Ben Shapiro is on his way. But next in the media buzz, as fears of an all-out war grow and the Egyptian president says Israel has exceeded the right to self-defense, has their retaliation against Hamas gone too far? My panel debate that. Plus, later in the hour, Kelvin McKenzie live in the studio, and he's not happy because the BBC are unwilling to call Hamas terrorists, even though new footage has emerged of the BBC 6 O'Clock News after 9/11 and Peter Sissons actually saying the word terrorist about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. So why 9/11 and not the 7th of October 2023? Welcome to the world of BBC double standards. Kelvin will be dealing with that, and let me tell you, he is furious. So a busy hour to come. Don't go anywhere. This is GB News Tonight.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Things pretty calm out there at the moment, but through this week, it's going to turn very wet and very windy with the potential for some significant disruption from this area of low pressure that this morning here at the Met Office, we named Storm Babbitt. It's moving northwards, bringing a lot of moisture, slow-moving bands of heavy rain likely to cause some problems. We have a number of Met Office yellow warnings in place. Out there this evening, though, it's the calm before the storm. A fine night, actually. With clear skies, it'll turn quite cold across Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England. A touch of frost possible here in rural spots. Further south, a bit more cloud and the breeze picking up as we go through the night. Going to turn quite blustery at times over southwest England, north and west Wales during Tuesday. So some gusty winds here. Quite a lot of clouds spilling up from the southwest. Some showery rain possible for Devon, Cornwall, maybe later on into Pembrokeshire. A few showers continuing over the Northern Isles, maybe one or two getting into the east coast of England as well as the breeze picks up here. But for many, it's a dry and a fine day. Will be a bit of a chilly one. Again, temperatures generally a touch below average for the time of year and feeling colder as the winds start to pick up. The winds will strengthen further. However, it's the rain that we're most concerned about here at the Met Office for the rest of this week. A number of warnings are in place. Do check out our website for the details on all of those.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It is coming up to 10 o'clock. I am Mark Dolan and this is GB News Tonight. Great to have your company. Now, 6 Brits are confirmed dead in the Hamas terror attack on Israel, whilst a further 10 are missing. One of America's biggest conservative commentators, the world-renowned Ben Shapiro, joins me for his blistering take on the atrocity and whether Israel's response has gone far enough, and also whether the US should get involved in the war and wobbly Joe Biden. Shapiro here for a big interview shortly. Meanwhile, with fears of all-out war growing and Egypt saying Israel has far exceeded the right to self-defense, tonight's panel gets stuck into whether Israel's reaction risks going over the top. Are innocent civilians a price worth paying to destroy Hamas? Debating that tonight, we have Carol Malone, Benjamin Butterworth, Strobing, and the wonderful, flowery Belinda DeLucy. And where is Carol? She's disappearing before our very eyes. Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie is also on standby with his unmissable analysis of the chaos in the Middle East. Plus, he's not happy with the BBC. I'll also be asking Kelvin whether Keir Starmer should expel Labour members who are found to have terrorist sympathies. Kelvin is uncancelled later. And lightening the mood, renowned filmmaker Richard Curtis, he of 4 Weddings and a Funeral fame, declares that he'll never make fat jokes again in his work after his ultra-politically correct daughter took him to task. So, are younger generations too sensitive, or are fat jokes offensive? What's wrong with a few gags about the chubsters? My panel debate that shortly. Plus, they'll be debating who should be our greatest Britain and Union jackass. Lots to get through, but first, here's the news and Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you. Well, good evening to you. Let's bring you a bit more breaking news that we told you about in the last hour about that shooting in Brussels, the Belgian capital. We can tell you that since we last spoke, Brussels has increased its terror threat level to the highest tonight after 2 people were confirmed dead in a shooting in what the Belgian authorities are now confirming they're treating as a terrorist attack. The victims thought to have been Swedish football fans visiting Brussels for their team's Euro 2024 qualifier against Belgium. If you're watching on television, you can see we're showing you live pictures of forensic teams at the scene trying to gather evidence as to exactly what happened a couple of hours ago. Meanwhile, I can tell you that at the stadium in Brussels tonight, football fans have been told to stay inside. The Swedish side refusing to play the second half of the game once they heard 2 of their fans had been shot. The game was abandoned. The Belgian Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, has confirmed both victims were Swedish nationals. He's offered his sincere condolences to the country. Local Belgian media is reporting the gunman is still on the loose, hence the terror alert threat being lifted to the maximum level. We also understand he's posted a video on social media claiming to be part of ISIS, saying he had killed 3 infidels. So that's the scene in Brussels, in Belgium tonight, after 2 Swedish nationals were shot dead, and we believe the suspect is still at large. Well, also in the news today, the Prime Minister led a minute's silence in the House of Commons today as he confirmed that at least 6 British citizens were killed in the Hamas attack on Israel last weekend, with a further 10 people still missing. Earlier, Rishi Sunak had visited a Jewish secondary school in North London, reassuring students his government would always support them. The government also announced this afternoon it's going to be providing an extra £10 million in humanitarian aid to Gaza, saying the Palestinian people are the victims of Hamas too. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts to find a political solution to the conflict in Israel continues, with the US Secretary of State holding talks with regional leaders to try to stop the conflict spreading and to get aid into Gaza. Anthony Blinken was in Israel once again today, as the news came through from doctors in Gaza that they were struggling to treat the huge numbers of patients injured in Israeli airstrikes. Aid agencies saying hospitals are running out of medicines and fuel for generators, with only the most serious cases given access to vital treatment. And the United Nations weighed in today, warning the humanitarian situation on the Gaza Strip was deteriorating by the hour. Well, there was hope twice earlier on today that aid could come into Gaza through Egypt's Rafah crossing on the south border with Gaza. There was an expectation the crossing may open first thing this morning at 9 o'clock local time. Then it was mooted from Washington. It would open once again, but didn't open up at all, and it's still closed despite thousands of people massing at the border, desperate to get out of the Gaza Strip. And in more news from Israel, in the north, terror group Hezbollah has fired rockets at Israel. The Israeli Defense Force has responded with shelling and helicopter gunships firing back. And in the south, troops are continuing to gather near Ashkelon to prepare for the planned ground assault that's been talked about by the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, the US President Joe Biden has said he's confident Israel will be acting according to the rules of war, but also saying there must be a path to a Palestinian state, and he warned Iran not to get involved today. Well, the reaction here in the UK is centred in London, where hundreds of demonstrators gathered outside the BBC's headquarters this evening to protest against the corporation's editorial stance on Hamas. The corporation's facing a backlash from the public and Jewish groups calling for Hamas militants to be called terrorists. The crowd, supported by the National Jewish Assembly, chanted BBC shame on you, and some placards read, if the king calls Hamas terrorists, so can you. The BBC issued a statement saying it takes the use of language very seriously. Pro-Palestinian activists have also criticised the BBC, covering its headquarters in red paint on Saturday. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks, Polly. My panel are back, reacting to the big stories of the day. Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy. And we've got more papers in. Let's have a look now at Metro. And they lead with this Israel-Hamas war. Let them go now. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has called on Hamas to release all the hostages it took in its attack on Israel. As it emerged, two are teenage British sisters whose mother was killed in a kibbutz massacre. Absolutely shocking. Well, the worsening war between Israel and Hamas is threatening to tear apart the Middle East, with Israeli jets launching a retaliatory bombing campaign against Iran-backed paramilitary group Hezbollah in Lebanon, promising to destroy the country if Hezbollah enters the conflict. This comes as both UK and US officials express concerns that the wider region could be dragged into an all-out war, with the Egyptian president warning US Secretary of State Antony Blinken that Israel's military operation against Hamas has exceeded the right of self-defence and turned into a collective punishment. Today, Rishi Sunak hit back at Labour MP Nadia Whittome after she blamed Israel, not Hamas, for the tragic loss of lives in Gaza.
The civilians of Gaza should not be made to pay the price for the atrocities of Hamas. Blocking children's access to food goes beyond self-defence. It's a violation of international law.
Just gently point out to the Honourable Lady that it's not Israel that is deliberately targeting civilians in Gaza. It's Hamas that is enmeshing itself in the civilian population and using people as human shields. And she talks about people moving. Again, Israel is attempting to minimise the impact on civilians by asking people to leave northern Gaza. And it's Hamas who is telling people to stay, and again, using them as human shields.
So tonight I'm asking, should Israel stop at nothing to destroy Hamas? How about this email from Barry, who says, hi, Mark, you can't enter into a partial war. The aggressor will never respect partiality. Note the aggressors in both World War I and World War II. Carol Malone, should Israel stop at nothing to defeat Hamas?
Yes. I've got to qualify what I'm going to say. Yes, I think they should try and smash Hamas. I think any sane person would want to see the total destruction of these Hamas butchers. But we know that's not the case. And we also know that Hamas doesn't give a toss about ordinary Palestinians. They don't care the fact that they're being slaughtered as we speak. Hamas knew the likely response of what Israel would do when they attacked Israel the other day. So they knew exactly this was going to happen. All of this said, if I was Jewish or if I was living in Israel now, I would want my government to go hell for leather at what had happened, because they have seen the slaughter. They've seen the babies killed, they've seen the children killed, they've seen the old people shot. They will want their government to avenge what has happened.
And they don't want it to happen again.
And they don't want it to happen again. And I think they think if the world is now, I mean, I forgot who it was who said that, that Israel have been asked to show restraint now, and they've gone way beyond, just keeping the peace or whatever.
Egyptian president.
Yes. I mean, Israel has always asked to show restraint, always. Even though it's Hamas that have started this, It's not Israel who've started this particular problem. So I think, if I was an Israeli, if I was living there, or if I was a Jewish person living in this country, I would want to see Hamas pay, and I would want my government to stop at nothing to do that. My fear is that it will trigger a war. That is my big terror, that lots of countries involved, lots of Middle Eastern countries that are involved in this, they're already threatening, Iran's already threatening and saying we won't turn a blind eye if there's any interference. That scares the tripe out of me. It does.
Well, Belinda, to defeat Hamas is to kill civilians, probably hundreds of thousands. Is that acceptable?
I actually don't think they will end up doing that. I think they have done as much as they can to avoid killing civilians, moving them down south, warning them, having leaflets coming from the air, telling them to leave and evacuate. What more can they do than that? Now, if civilians are still in an area where Israel are going to bomb or have a ground offensive in, then Hamas need to protect the Palestinians. It's actually Hamas that are in government. Their duty of care is towards the Palestinians.
But they're going to pack more people into those areas.
Every single Palestinian death that they can blame on Israel is a strategic win for Hamas, which is why they use them as human shields. And it is them, quite right of Rishi to say that, it is Hamas that is putting Palestinians
and they're
at
blocking
risk.
exit routes, Belinda. And blocking,
blocking exit routes. You know, these horrific Islamist terror groups around the world, they've been responsible for killing nearly 250,000 of people between 1979 and 2021. And Hamas is part of that now. And if Israel takes them out, they're taking them out not just for civilization, but for the world, because Hamas won't stop if they win. They will try and build their Islamist state upon the rubble of every Western civilization.
Hitler didn't stop in Poland.
Exactly. So thank God, I hope Israel destroys them, and I'm sure that they will rise above the butchery that you just would never imagine any human to do that Hamas did.
Well, Benjamin, Hamas have told residents of North Gaza to stay put. That's how cruel and unscrupulous they are. However, there is the civilian factor. I understand one of the key terror cells of Hamas is located in the basement of a major hospital. Of course it is. And the UN and the WHO have condemned Israel's actions so far. Are they right?
No. I think the real danger for Israel is that this plays out on our television screens in a way that people only see the part of the story that is civilians being killed as a consequence of Israeli retaliations. And I think that's why it's so important that you get the message across that Hamas puts its headquarters in schools, in hospitals, in a university, that they do that on purpose because they want to compromise the Palestinians. And when people talk about why Israel should show restraint, well, how many times is this going to happen and Israel shows restraint? If you care about Palestinian civilian lives, then you won't let Hamas exist in any form, because if you do, this will happen again and again, as it has for the last 75 years.
Yeah, Hamas don't want peace. They don't want a two-state solution. They want to destroy Israel. Yeah. And they don't care how many Palestinians die in the process of that. You know, it's kind of, you know, and you're right when Israel has always asked to fight wars by rules that other countries would not stick to. You know, a country that has just been attacked in the way Israel has is going to come back. Yeah. And yet the Israelis are expected to show... they're told to be proportionate. Yeah. What's proportionate?
What more can they do than what they have done? I find it sickening. It's almost like that people want them to just lie down and take it and get battered again and again throughout history. They've been persecuted and slaughtered, and it hasn't been removed from people.
Do you know, I heard an argument last week in this country, which I couldn't believe, and I heard two sets of apologists for the Hamas terror talking. So they'd heard the stories about babies being beheaded, and this person was going, well, they weren't beheaded, they were just shot. Like that matters.
Extraordinary.
You know, it's not, so they're not bothered about the slaughter. They're arguing about the manner of the slaughter because beheading's some worse.
And may I just say, with the way that Hamas runs Gaza, there are innocent civilians being killed all the time. Every day that we've been sat here, they have been killing people, and it didn't make the news. It's notable that it only makes the news when Israel is involved.
There you go. You have to stand up to bullies. It was ever thus. Coming up, renowned filmmaker Richard Curtis, of course the director and writer of 4 Weddings and a Funeral, declares that he'll never make fat jokes again in his work after his ultra-PC daughter took him to task. So are younger generations too sensitive? Or are fat jokes offensive? Or are they funny? What about this one? How'd you get a fat kid to lose weight? You pay the ice cream man to keep on driving. Is that outrageous? What do we think about chubster gags? Let me know your thoughts. Mark at gbnews.com. We'll debate that at 10:30. But my panel are ready. Unfortunately, they're all very lean these days. Next up, one of America's biggest conservative commentators, Ben Shapiro, joins me for his forensic take on Hamas atrocities and whether Israel's response has gone far enough, as well as whether the US should get involved in the war. Is wobbly Joe Biden really the right man to have in the White House if it all kicks off? The big Shapiro interview is next.
think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie coming up with a devastating verdict on the BBC. But time now for my big interview with heavyweight US Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro. Ben is currently editor-in-chief of the hugely popular Daily Wire website and the presenter of the world-renowned Ben Shapiro Show. He's also an Orthodox Jew who's had plenty to say on the Hamas atrocities in Israel. Here's what he told me earlier in our Westminster studio. Shapiro, how divided is America in response to this terror attack on Israel?
Right now, the polls are showing not a lot of division, actually. There's a poll from CNN that came out this morning that showed that well in excess of 2/3 of Americans are in favor of Israel defending itself. The number of Americans who believe that Israel should not be defending itself or taking the action that it's taking in the Gaza Strip is high single digits, low double digits. Perhaps there are divisions by age. Younger Americans tend to be more pro-Palestinian than older Americans. And younger Americans also tend to be under the misimpression that Hamas was not deliberately targeting civilians at a larger rate than older Americans. But overall, the American people are very squarely behind Israel in the current conflict.
Can you conflate support for Palestine with support for Hamas?
I think it's possible to separate them. I'm just going to note that a lot of the people who should be separating them are conflating them. So, sure, you can say there ought to be a Palestinian state, that in the best of all possible worlds, that there would be a two-state solution. What you cannot do is protest in favor of Hamas and then suggest that you are separate from the Palestinian cause while flying a Palestinian flag. I mean, one of the things that I'm noting is that it's not a lot of Palestinian moderate advisors or Palestinian so-called moderate supporters who are condemning Hamas. There's been a rather deafening silence from that quarter. Again, is it possible logically to separate those things? Of course. Has that separation been effectuated in practice? I'm not seeing the evidence.
Why do the left have such difficulty in condemning this terror attack on Israel, the biggest single attack on Jewish people since the end of the Holocaust? I think
fairly simply, the left internationally has been anti-Israel since the 1967 war. But more broadly speaking, right now, the left has become a quote-unquote coalition of dispossessed oriented against traditional institutions. And that holds true in America, it holds true in Britain, it holds true in Israel as well. And so the idea is that Israel is some sort of colonial outpost of Western civilization and that it has quote-unquote dispossessed the Palestinians, and thus any sort of decolonization effort up to and including the slaughter of innocent babies in their cribs is thus justified. And that's sort of the justification that you're seeing these days. It's hideous and it's ugly, but unfortunately that is what you're seeing.
How far do you think America will support Israel in their objective of eliminating Hamas?
Yeah, I would hope all the way. I think it's in the world's interest and in America's interest for Israel to eliminate Hamas. And I frankly don't think that Israel has much of a choice but to do so. After 1,300 Jews were murdered, and others, by the way, a lot of Israeli Arabs, Druze, like a lot of people were murdered, and 200 hostages were taken. No country worth its salt would allow the entity responsible for that to continue operating, let alone to remain in control of a swath of land like the Gaza Strip. I think America is likely to rearm and resupply Israel. And I think America and virtually every other party, including Israel, has an interest in the conflict being contained to just between Israel and Hamas, as opposed to a northern front opening from Hezbollah or Iran entering and this turning into a regional or possibly worldwide conflagration.
Indeed. Now, anti-Semitism, sadly, Ben, is a given in the Middle East. But do you think we've seen more of it than we might have expected in the West in the last 7 days? In London, for example, we've had pro-Palestinian marches in which some awfully anti-Semitic language has been used.
Yeah, I'm certainly shocked by the extent to which that sort of reaction has been prevalent. And you started to see mass protests in favor of Hamas, not against Israel, in favor of Hamas very early on. We're talking by like October 8th, October 9th, in a lot of these public centers and American universities, and the jump to the conclusion that the blood of Israeli babies is somehow on Jewish hands. Simultaneously, you've seen a mass propaganda effort to blame the Hamas, to blame civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip, not on Hamas, which is actually attempting to shield its own terrorists with civilians. I mean, they literally built tunnel networks under civilian areas to this purpose, but to blame that on Israel as well. So I'm bewildered by it. I'm shocked by it. I don't know a Jew who isn't, certainly, or an Israel supporter who isn't. I mean, this is the clearest cut case of an immoral massacre in recent human rights history. And yet there seems to be a fairly solid base of support for the proposition that kids murdered in their own beds, women raped and kidnapped, that all of that is acceptable so long as it's directed against Jews.
Indeed, perhaps not surprising that college students in America have been called out for either supporting Hamas or being very proactively supportive of Palestine after this awful attack on Jewish people.
That's right. I mean, listen, everyone has a right to speak freely in the United States and to take whatever awful position they want to take in the United States. Also, no business has a duty to hire anybody who supports a terrorist group.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Listen, can Hamas be eliminated, and how long might it take?
It's unclear to what extent Hamas can, quote unquote, be eliminated. If by the leadership of Hamas, we're talking Hamas, then sure, the leadership of Hamas can be and will be eliminated by Israel. As far as the forces that led to the rise of Hamas and to the continued control of Hamas, that's going to be a broader proposition, because a lot of Hamas's ideas, a lot of its genocidal concepts have been embedded in Palestinian education, not just in the Gaza Strip, but also in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. They've been embedded there for decades at this point. The Palestinian Authority didn't launch this attack, but the Palestinian Authority does have funds that are provided to the families of terrorists. Islamic Jihad, which is the other governing power in the West Bank, is an actual terrorist group along the lines of Hamas. So, again, this is an intractable problem that's not going to be solved with one military intervention. Hamas can be deposed. The question as to what comes after in the Gaza Strip is going to be a very difficult one to answer for Israel and for the rest of the world.
Is President Joe Biden equipped to handle this crisis?
I mean, I think that, frankly, Joe Biden is not equipped to handle pretty much anything at this point. His response so far has been what it ought to be. in the sense that he's put 2 American aircraft carriers off the coast of the Mediterranean in an attempt to dissuade Hezbollah from firing on Israel and getting into the war, opening a second front. He's providing the military resupply for Israel, and he's speaking some nice words. It would have been nice if he had not funded Hamas funded Iran to the tune of billions of dollars. And also, by the way, yes, funded Hamas via Palestinian aid in the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of his administration. That sort of weakness tends to lead to aggression in the Middle East, not to gratitude and conciliation.
Last but not least, Ben, is this moment an existential moment for the state of Israel?
Certainly. It is absolutely an existential moment for the state of Israel. Literally everyone in Israel, right to left, understands that, which is why everyone is so unified in the state of Israel. They understand that even if Hamas does not have the unilateral capacity to destroy Israel, they understand that if Israel does not destroy Hamas, then the threats to Israel on the northern border from a significantly more powerful Hezbollah will only grow, that the threats in the West Bank from the Palestinian Authority, Islamic Jihad, that those will only grow, that the threats from Iran via Syria and Lebanon are only going to grow. In the Middle East, strength is pretty much the only thing that matters, and the impression that Israel is an impregnable fortress has been obviously pierced. Israel has to reestablish that impression in very, very short order if they wish to maintain a durable presence in the Middle East.
Ben, a privilege to have you on the show. We will obviously give our viewers details of how to watch your brilliant programme on the Daily Wire, and thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
And let me do that right now. You can catch Ben Shapiro on The Ben Shapiro Show, Monday to Friday at thedailywire.com. Simple as that. Now, coming up in Uncancelled, I'll ask whether the left should hang their heads in shame for supporting death cult Hamas, and if Keir Starmer should expel Labour members who are found to have terrorist sympathies. Let me tell you, there's already a Labour mutiny happening on the backbenches. I'll get reaction from Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie. Plus, he's got some harsh words about the BBC. But next in the media buzz, renowned filmmaker from 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Richard Curtis, declares that he will never make fat jokes again in his work after his woke daughter took him to task. So are younger generations too sensitive? Are fat jokes offensive, or are they just a bit of a laugh? My panel will debate that next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK. Here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. The front pages are in. Let's have a look at what we've got, courtesy of Bobby. Let's have a look. The I newspaper, Israel prepares to fight Hamas in Gaza tunnels. Israeli troops brace for underground war in 300 miles of a tunnel network. Delay before ground invasion whilst global diplomats try to help Palestinian civilians escape via the border crossing. And so the Israel security services can gather intelligence on Hamas targets. How about the Daily Mail now? Violent prisoners to be let out early. Hundreds of offenders to have sentences cut by 18 days under a Tory government, say the Mail. Also, teenage British sisters now feared to be Gaza hostages. Gaza humanitarian crisis grows as US bid to ease blockade falters. And Poland's ruling populist party heading for defeat. The Daily Telegraph now. British girls missing after Hamas terror attack. Sunak's stealth raid, equivalent to a 6p income tax rise, say the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And suspected terrorist opens fire in Brussels, killing football fans. Those are your front pages. A couple of emails to catch up on, mark at gbnews.com. On crime, you've heard that headline there, Tories to let some criminals out early. This from David Mark, the simplest form of punishment for low-level crime is the birch. No need for prison. 6 of the birch, and I can assure you, you will not do it again. Well, talking about crime, should it be against the law to misgender someone? So let's imagine you've got a biological male that identifies as female. If you say he, should you go to jail? Should you go to prison? Well, that's being hinted at or suggested in a debate from the Labour Party, who, let's be honest, will probably win the next election. Maggie says, Mark, if a man wanted if a man wanted me to call him Wendy, I would comply, but I'll not mess around with my language. His name is his choice, but the English language is mine, and I won't take part in a lie. Even if a man has had cosmetic surgery to his genitals, he's still a man. Pat says, hi, Mark, I will call a man, and if she is offended and I get arrested, then I will identify as a dog. So how does 2 years in prison work for me as a dog? Well, Pat, I can only imagine it would be rough. More of your emails coming, mark at gbnews.com, but reacting to the big stories of the day, Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster, the very glamorous Benjamin Butterworth, and the marvellous double threat, brains and beauty, former Brexit Party MEP, political commentator Belinda DeLucy. Now, from Martine McCutcheon's character in Love Actually being labelled the chubby girl with tree trunk legs, to Bridget Jones having a bottom the size of Brazil, legendary filmmaker Richard Curtis is no stranger to a fat joke. But he's called time on weight jibes after he was called out by his own daughter, the feminist writer Scarlett Curtis, in an interview at the Cheltenham Literature Festival. He said, I was behind the curve and those jokes aren't funny any longer. I wasn't malicious, but I was unobservant and not as clever as I should have been. But Carol, first of all, is he going to hand back all the millions of pounds that he's made from those films?
Well, no, of course he isn't. And his daughter, who has benefited from the many millions of pounds that her father's made, is not going to hand it back either. This really gets on my nerves. This is utter tosh, because this girl, Scarlett, clearly doesn't get her dad's genius. And the genius of Richard Curtis was he could portray, he'd have a character like Martine McCutcheon, who was a bit chubby, who did have tree trunk legs and all that. But the whole positive message of that was that the hot Prime Minister fell in love with her and married her. So, well, we don't know if he married, but we know he was going to. And the thing about Love Actually was, not Love Actually, the thing about, what do you call it, Bridget Jones, here was a girl who was a little bit chunky, a little bit overweight, Stop laughing. She was a little bit chunky, but she resonated, her character resonated with millions of women around the world to make it one of the most successful movies of all time. Yeah. So for his daughter to sit there, Scarlett, who has never made a movie in her life, and if Richard Curtis takes notice of her, he's never going to make another successful movie in his life. Now, lesson from Disney. Disney went woke last year. They've lost nearly £1 billion this year with all the woke movies they've made. So Curtis If he wants to take notice of his daughter, his millions are going to start to dissipate. He says he's made another movie, which is a bit wokey, and he's very pleased with it. But let's see if the viewing public are pleased with it.
What do you think? Were his jokes and his movies a bit harsh on the chubsters, Benjamin?
Yeah, there's no way you would use language like that in a film today, and for the better we are.
Are we?
Know, if you were to look at magazines 15 years ago, 10 years ago even, and lots of tabloids, the kind of way they talked about people in the public eye, they would find women and photograph them, and they would circle little bits of cellulite, and they'd splash it across the pages, saying how disgusting those women were.
A bit of accountability.
No, they never said they were disgusting.
They did, absolutely.
No, they didn't.
You know they did.
No, they didn't.
What did they say, Carol?
Well, they didn't. They never called them disgusting. But
they didn't say it looked nice, did they?
You can't not talk about fat at a time when 1 in 2 people in this country...
And why can't we have a joke about it?
To be fair, I first came across Carol Malone when she did Celebrity Fat Club. So,
yes, exactly. It was actually called Celebrity Fit Club, which just shows his prejudice, does it not?
I think it was known as Fat Club.
The thing that's really bad for women is these neoliberal, precious, entitled feminists who are doing more harm to women than good, portraying us as these fragile, little, pathetic flowers that couldn't simply take a joke. I don't care about women jokes and blonde jokes in movies. Sometimes they're quite funny. And what the UK needs more than ever on our screens right now, bring back Little Britain, bring back Monty Python, bring back The Inbetweeners. They were great shows because people had a sense of humour nowadays.
Benjamin, but what's wrong with saying that a character's got an arse the size of Brazil?
What's wrong with that?
But bigotry isn't funny, Mark.
Oh, it's not bigotry in your mind.
You know, for someone
it's not bigotry, it's probably the truth.
For someone like Belinda, who self-identifies as a feminist, to then endorse attacking women on the way they look. The truth is that, you know, when you talk about these characters in Love Actually and Bridget Jones, it's no coincidence that it's always, pretty much always, the women whose image, whose size is constantly torn apart as a joke. Why is it that you don't have the same number of jokes about men?
We do exactly have that. We have big guys with big bellies with vests. We take the big out of them.
Yeah, these films are not built around jokes about men, are they?
The minute you start censoring comedy, it's not funny anymore. Richard Curtis says his jokes aren't funny now. Yes, they are. They're still funny. I still watch those movies and I still laugh.
But I think modern audiences won't tolerate this because we have a generation of young people in my generation who don't expect to have things like their image torn apart when they're paying to see a film.
Oh, my gosh.
I think if the only joke you can come up with is how big someone's thighs are, then you're not a very good writer.
Benjamin, you are talking a load of plus-sized crap.
Yes, that's exactly
And I don't want to watch any movie that you want to watch. It will be BBC-approved lecturing Bourville Von Bucket. I got it out in the end.
This show is all about opinions. What's yours, Mark at gbnews.com. Coming up, J.K. Rowling, the England rugby team, and Conservative MP Peter Bone are up for awards in tonight's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. Find out why shortly. And should the left hang their heads in shame for supporting death cult Hamas? And should Keir Starmer expel Labour members who are not on message with his position on Israel? Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie is in the building. And let me tell you, he's not happy with the BBC. Find out why in 2.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's time now for Uncancelled, and pro-Palestine demonstrations across the country turned ugly this weekend, with police in London making a number of arrests as activists launched bottles, flares and placards in Trafalgar Square. Meanwhile, in Glasgow, a woman wearing a Palestinian flag was filmed making a sickening anti-Semitic barb whilst on a protest march. Take a listen. If you didn't hear those words, she said, "Don't forget where you were in 1940. Ha! Welcome to the Be Kind crowd. Welcome to modern Britain." Now, those scenes have prompted the Labour Party to issue a strong warning to MPs not to attend protests, while supporters have been urged to exercise caution and not to take Labour Party banners to any demonstrations. But critics are now accusing Labour of shutting down any solidarity with Palestinians, and rumours circulate that backbench MPs do not want to follow Starmer's lead in coming out against Hamas, with a number of them, after his statement today, making comments about Israel's behaviour which directly contradict Starmer's message. So to discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome the Wolf of Fleet Street, Kelvin McKenzie. Kelvin, the left are not united in regards to this terror attack on Israel, and in particular, Keir Starmer's parliamentary party. Right? He spoke, I thought, very well, very clearly today, condemning Hamas, condemning an attack on Israel, Israel's right to defend herself. But Richard Bergen, backbench MP, straight up challenging that and effectively calling Israel a country guilty of war crimes.
Well, the reality is, all my life, the left of the Labour Party have been hostile, to Israel. I mean, they would like a one-state solution, i.e. Palestine, right? And they also, why should we be surprised that the left of the Labour Party don't embrace Hamas in some form or another? After all, look at Corbyn, right? So he had the opportunity to stand up as a former leader of the Labour Party at those weekend demonstrations and be quite clear. I am massively against what has happened. He never said that. He just said there shouldn't be war and there are going to be issues on both sides. And so I'm afraid that the left will always side because one of the reasons is the success of the Jewish state. I mean, I don't know whether you've been there. It is astonishing. You go there. It is fantastic. The other incredible aspect to it, although the Arab population within Israel have exactly the same opportunity as the Jewish population, look at the way that the two areas have gone on. The Jewish, fantastic blocks of fabulous places, never Shedek in Tel Aviv, beyond fantastic. And then you look at the Arab side, right? Honestly, massively run down. You know, honestly, these are two separate people, and people have got to understand that. And I'm afraid that this war, I don't know how it's going to end, but what I do guarantee is that no Palestinian wants a Jew in the whole of Israel. They want to push them out. These wars will continue forever. They have had every opportunity, actually, to have a two-state solution, and they've never taken it. We are supporting Israel probably for the next 1,000 years.
And it's really good to hear not just the Prime Minister but Starmer back that up. But you do have these MPs behind Starmer who are diluting his message, effectively contradicting him. You've got Nadia Whittome, you've got Richard Bergen and others. Does this demonstrate how ungovernable the Labour parliamentary party will be should Starmer get in, especially if he's got a narrow majority?
Right. Well, first of all, unfortunately, I don't think he's going to end up with a narrow majority. But the reality is that if this were Starmer and he was Prime Minister right now, there would be a different note on the trumpet. And I'm afraid we have got to get used to that. The left of the Labour Party seem to hate Jews, and I think they hate them because they are successful and they have withstood some of the vilest things to happen to any group of people of all. They've been being chased for 2,500 years, chased from this country, chased from Morocco, chased from Germany. They've chased all over the place. Finally, they get a homeland, and then the Palestinians turn around and say, we don't care what their decision was in 47. We are going to blast you out of there. So Hamas actually are doing the job of the people. The people are all saying, oh, it's nothing to do with us, Hamas. They want that land. They want the Jews out. This is never going to end, I'm afraid. I don't care how this war ends. It's not the last war. It's shocking.
Of course, it's been pointed out in the Commons today that there's a difference between the Palestinian people and Hamas. Of course...
Is there really?
Well, there is.
Is there really? They've stood there. Hamas have gained power over the years.
Well,
Hezbollah have gained power.
They got rid of elections once they were in.
They did indeed get rid of it.
Not exactly a sort of, a paradise of...
that is true, but I haven't seen the people rise up and throw them back out again, have you? Yeah. Why hasn't that happened? Why have Hezbollah not been thrown out of the Lebanon? There's very good answers to this. Actually, the people are all saying, oh, isn't it terrible, isn't it terrible? Come on, throw them out, throw them out. That's the reality. And I'm afraid that is the reality, and that is what the Israeli government know. They know that if they don't try and deal with this once and for all, and it won't work, by the way, but if we don't try and deal with this once and for all, then I'm afraid we face this even worse coming at us within years.
Indeed. Look, it's all about opinions. There are plenty of people out there who think that Israel do have a case to answer for their treatment of the Palestinian people too. But can I talk to you about the BBC? Because a video is emerging today. It's gone viral. It's Peter Sissons on the 6 o'clock news, when they used to have proper newsreaders. Yeah. Great journalist. Calling the 9/11 attacks an act of terror, calling Al-Qaeda terrorists. Why can't the BBC call Hamas terrorists?
It's very difficult. I've just been seeing, just before I came on air right now, the killing of those 2 Swedish guys tonight. Yeah, absolutely shocking. BBC headline describing it as a terror attack. Right. Well, I tell you what, they haven't. Whoever wrote that headline didn't get the email, did they? The truth about the matter is, they should just do the right thing. They are terrorists. And actually, the rest of the Middle East, with the exception of Iran, views them as terrorists. They don't want Hamas in their backyard any more than the Israelis do.
Have the BBC brought themselves into disrepute with this position? The standing of the public, the perception of the BBC? Has it been damaging for the brand?
I think there's difficulties with the number of Muslim employees that the BBC have with what is said at home for those within their homes, and then they come in to work and they're supposed to put to one side all the propaganda and all the political debate that they hear at home. I find that almost impossible to believe.
Do you mean UK journalists?
UK journalists, UK BBC journalists.
Kelvin, you can't read their minds. I mean, you're saying you know what they think at home.
Yes, you're quite right. You can't read their minds. I totally agree with you. It would be hard to believe, wouldn't it, if you lived in a big Muslim community in London and you worked for the BBC, that when you came in the morning, you put aside everything you'd heard at your home, your spouse, your children, your school, your mosque, and then said, that you were balanced about it. It's just not possible.
Well, you raise a good point in relation to the international service of the BBC Arabic services, in which several of their talent, their star turns, have tweeted in sympathy for Hamas, or at the very least, Palestinian aggression.
Yes, and you'd have to believe. Right, there are 300,000 Jews in our country. There are 3.3 million Muslims. You watch the Labour left. They know where the votes are. It's disgraceful.
Kelvin, I look forward to seeing you in a week's time, dropping the truth bombs as always. A response from the BBC, because we're all about balance. The BBC say we always take our use of language very seriously. Anyone watching or listening to our coverage will hear the word terrorist used many times. We attribute it to those who are using it, for example, the UK government. This is an approach that's been used for decades and is in line with that of other broadcasters. Kelvin, thank you so much. We'll see you next Monday. It's time now to reveal today's Greatest Britain and Union jackass. And to reveal theirs, Carol Malone, Benjamin Butterworth and Belinda de Lucy. Carol, who's your greatest Britain?
OK, mine is J.K. Rowling, who today said she's happy to keep taking the hit in terms of talking about trans issues over women's rights. She says she'll always be able to feed her family and voice her opinions, unlike many others who can't. So I'd like to also here give a big shout-out to Sharon Davis, who has fought trans issues on the same level as J.K. has, only she has been cancelled. A lot of her work contracts were cancelled because of what she said. So here's a big shout out to all these men and women who have taken on the trans activists and actually fought for women's rights.
Well, I agree. It's wonderful to see people with money and a platform actually using it. You've got the brilliant comedian Ricky Gervais, you've got J.K. Rowling and others. They can't be cancelled and they have been heroic. History, Carol Malone, will judge them kindly.
Yeah, it's true.
Benjamin, history will judge that rather fancy shirt of yours very kindly. Who's your greatest Britain?
Well, mine is a real Great Britain. Vahid Beheshti, who, for those that were watching in the first hour, he is the man that waved the Israeli flag and was chased and allegedly seriously threatened in the streets of Whitehall for celebrating Israel and the freedom of Jews and the Israelis. He's a man I've known for about 6 or 7 months, reporting on the terrorism that the Iranian state does, and I think he is truly fearless, and he and his wife Matty are Great Britons.
Well, that's a great choice. He was a privileged guest for us to have on tonight. Belinda, your greatest Britain?
I love both of those so far, by the way. But my greatest Britain is the England rugby team, who won their quarter-final yesterday. A really fierce and courageous match against the amazing Fijians. It was just a brilliant game, and I love Go England, win the World Cup.
I thought it was brilliant. I spent a couple of hours last night just watching videos of the hookers. Now, I'm going to give it to Carol Malone tonight. Carol, J.K. Rowling, will you behave?
Oh, I'd like to hand it to Ben's.
There you are.
Share it?
That's a great shout.
OK, my jackass.
Briefly now, you're a union jackass.
My
Carol.
jackass is, Mr. Flip-Flop, Mr. Shifty, Captain Hindsight, Sir Keir Starmer. He's done it again. He's had so many policy U-turns, so many abandoned pledges, and he's done it again today. He's actually said that one of the things he promised to do was to abolish the House of Lords in his first 5 years in government because it was indefensible. And now he's rode back and said he's not going to do anything major. He's just going to tweak it. He's also had to drop plans for he promised radical changes to social care. He's dropped them as well because he doesn't know how he's going to afford them. You can't believe a single word this man says.
Ouch. Well, listen, maybe he's just being straight with the public. He wants to get things done he can.
No, he's not being straight. He just talks tosh and then he realises it can't be done.
Listen, OK, you're entitled to your view. He was good in the comments today on Israel, so well done,
He was
Keir.
good today, but that's not the point.
OK, fair enough. Benjamin, briefly, if you can, your jackass.
Yeah, it's Peter Bone, the Tory MP, that a report in Parliament has found him guilty of bullying and sexual impropriety, and it's been recommended that he gets a 6-week suspension from Parliament. I think bullies and people that behave inappropriately in that way shouldn't be MPs. Peter Bone, if you've got any self-respect and respect for the public, resign now.
Let me say that Peter Bone vigorously denies the allegations. Belinda, briefly, if you can, your jackass.
Mine is the person who attacked a Jewish school last night in London by throwing red paint on the door so the children would see it the next morning. Disgusting anti-Semitism on our streets. I hope the police catch whoever it was.
What a great nomination for jackass. It's got to be that disgusting idiot that desecrated a Jewish property. Like I said earlier, in my big opinion, if Jewish people aren't safe in this country, Britain is not a proper country at all. I'm back tomorrow at 9. Thanks for your company. Headliners is next. Stay lucky and thanks to the team.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Things pretty calm out there at the moment, but through this week, it's going to turn very wet and very windy with the potential for some significant disruption from this area of low pressure that this morning here at the Met Office, we named Storm Babbitt. It's moving northwards, bringing a lot of moisture, slow-moving bands of heavy rain likely to cause some problems. We have a number of Met Office yellow warnings in place. Out there this evening, though, it's the calm before the storm. A fine night, actually. With clear skies, it'll turn quite cold across Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England. A touch of frost possible here in rural spots. Further south, a bit more cloud and the breeze picking up as we go through the night. Going to turn quite blustery at times over southwest England, north and west Wales during Tuesday. So some gusty winds here. Quite a lot of clouds spilling up from the southwest. Some showery rain possible for Devon, Cornwall, maybe later on into Pembrokeshire. A few showers continuing over the Northern Isles, maybe one or two getting into the east coast of England as well as the breeze picks up here. But for many, it's a dry and a fine day. Will be a bit of a chilly one. Again, temperatures generally a touch below average for the time of year and feeling colder as the winds start to pick up. The winds will strengthen further. However, it's the rain that we're most concerned about here at the Met Office for the rest of this week. A number of warnings are in place. Do check out our website for the details on all of those.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday the...
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel.